Section 9 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. First year, letters 5 and 6. Saint-Maurice, August 1801. I have deferred writing to you until I had a fixed abode. My arrangements are now made, and I shall spend the winter here. Prior to that season I shall contrive a few trifling excursions, but as the autumn advances I shall cease to move about. I was to have visited the canton of Fribourg and entered Le Valais through the mountains, but I was compelled by the rains to repair to Vevey by way of Payerne and Lausanne. It was fair weather when I entered Vevey, but had it been otherwise, I could not have been persuaded to continue my way by coach. Between Lausanne and Vevey there is an undulating road, nearly always on the slope, and flanked by small vineyards which impress me as monotonous, at least in a country like this. But Vevey, Clermont, Chillon, the 3 leagues between Saint-Symphorien and Villeneuve, surpass anything that I have seen hitherto. The Lake of Geneva is commonly admired on the Rhôle side. I do not pretend to adjudicate, but it is at Vevey, at Chillon above all, that it is seen in all its beauty. What can be further desired than this wonderful basin, the view of the peak of Jaman, the Aiguille du Midi, and the snows of Velan, or in face of the high rocks of Meillerie, an eminence rising sheer from the waters, a scarped island hard of approach, and in that island 2 or 3 houses at most. I could scarcely wish to stray farther. Why is it that nature so seldom offers what imagination suggests to our desires? Is it not that men compel us to imagine and to hanker after that which nature is not in the habit of forming, while if she chance to have produced it somewhere, they destroy it speedily? I slept at Villeneuve, a melancholy place in a land so fair. Before the heat of the day I explored the little wooded hills of Saint-Tryphon and the endless orchards which clothe the valley as far as Bex. I roamed betwixt 2 alpine chains of great elevation. Amidst all their snows I followed a level road through a fertile country, which in remote times seems to have been practically submerged. The valley, watered by the Rhone from Martigny to the lake, is divided almost in the middle by high rocks clothed with pastures and forests, which form the first platforms of the Dent de Morcle and the Dent du Midi, and are separated only by the bed of the river. Towards the north these rocks are partly covered with forests of chestnuts, and above these with firs. It is in such somewhat wild places that I have taken up my abode at the base of the Aiguille du Midi. This eminence is one of the most beautiful among the Alps. It is also one of the loftiest, if regard be paid to apparent rather than to absolute elevation, and to the striking amphitheatre which displays all the dignity of its outlines. Following the simple indications of maps and the volume of water, I find no summit, the altitude of which has been determined by calculations of trigonometry or barometric measurements, which has its base in such deep valleys. And hence I feel that I am warranted in ascribing to it an apparent height, practically as great as that of any other eminence in Europe. At the sight of these populated, productive, yet wild gorges, I abandoned the road to Italy, which turns off at this point to Bex, and directing my course towards the bridge over the Rhone, I took pathways through meadows of which our painters scarcely dream. The bridge, the castle, and the course of the Rhone form at this point a highly picturesque scene. For the town itself, a certain simplicity was all that I remarked therein. There is a suggestion of melancholy in its situation, but of the kind which I like. The mountains are fine, the valley is smooth, the rocks reach up close to the town and seem to impend over it. The dull roll of the Rhone saddens a region which appears cut off from the rest of the earth, entrenched and shut in on all sides. Though populous and cultivated, it seems nevertheless to be burdened or adorned with all the austerity of the deserts, what time the black clouds darken it, surging about the flanks of the mountains, glooming over sombre firs, colliding, conglomerating, brooding motionless like a darkling roof, or again when the day is cloudless and the sun's heat in its concentration ferments the unseen vapours, agitates with feverish ardour all that pants beneath the burning sky, and converts that lovely solitude into a bitter desolation. The cold rains that I had so recently experienced when I passed the Jura, which is only a slope near the Alps, and the snows which then whitened the Savoy mountains, though it was middle summer, made me ponder more seriously on the severity, and more yet on the length of the winters in the elevated portions of Switzerland. I was anxious to combine the mountain grandeur with the climate of the plains, and among the higher valleys I cherished the hope of finding some slopes open to the south, an excellent provision for fine frosty weather, though not of much account as regards the months of mist or the tardiness of spring. Absolutely resolved in any case not to take up my quarters in a town, I considered that I should be abundantly recompensed for disadvantages of this kind if I could be the guest of simple mountaineers in a cow farm, sheltered from cold winds, among pastures, the perennial green of the fir trees, and with a torrent near at hand. The event has decided otherwise. Here I have met with a pleasant climate, not indeed upon the mountains, but between them. I have allowed myself to be tempted into staying in the vicinity of Saint Maurice. I will not undertake to say how this has come to pass, and indeed I should be in no little difficulty if I were compelled to account for it. What, in the first place, you may well regard as incomprehensible is that the unspeakable weariness which has visited me here during the length of 4 wet days has materially helped to detain me. I have become enamoured of dejection. As for the winter, what I feared was not the weariness of loneliness, but the weariness of the snow. For the rest, I decided without volition and without choice, by a species of instinct which seemed to warn me that it was to be. When it became known that I should remain hereabouts, I was the recipient of a number of attentions offered with much courtesy and simplicity. The owner of a charming house close by the town was the sole acquaintance whom I cultivated. He pressed me to take up my residence on his property, or on others which he mentioned belonging to friends of his own. But I was in search of a picturesque situation, and a house in which I could reside alone. Fortunately, I realized in good time that if I went over any of these various dwellings, I should be sure to take one out of civility, even if all of them were the reverse of what I was looking for. Subsequently, disappointment over an ill-starred choice would leave me no other reasonable course but to abandon the district altogether. I gave a frank explanation of my feelings, into which my acquaintance appeared to enter, and I betook myself to exploring the neighbourhood, visiting places which pleased me better, and looking for an abode on chance, without even inquiring previously whether there was one to be found among them. I had been questing for 2 days, and it was in a country where, in close proximity to the town, there are places no less remote than in the depth of a wilderness, and hence I had only designed to spend 3 days over a search which I had no wish to prolong further. I had seen plenty of habitations in parts which did not attract me, and numerous charming spots where there were no houses, or only stone-built structures of wretched design. I was prompted to abandon my proposal, when at length I perceived the smoke of a chimney curling from behind a thick cluster of chestnuts. The waters, the denseness of the shadows, the seclusion of the meadows over all this slope were to me exceedingly pleasing. But it is inclined towards the north, and as I wished for a more favourable aspect, I should not have halted to observe it, had it not been for the smoke. After numerous windings and the crossing of rapid streams, I reached a solitary house on the verge of the woods and among the loneliest of meadows. A tolerable abode, a wood-built barn, a kitchen garden enclosed by a wide stream, 2 springs of excellent water, some crags, thunder of torrents, undulating ground everywhere, quick-set hedges, profuse vegetation, universal pasture land, far stretching under sparsely scattered beeches and chestnuts, onward to the firs of the mountain. Such is Weir. Before the same evening I had made my arrangements with the farmer, and subsequently visited the owner, who lives at Monte, half a league farther on. He met me in the most liberal manner. We came to an agreement forthwith, though it was less advantageous to me than his first offer, which could only have been accepted by a friend, while even that which he induced me to take would have appeared magnanimous on the part of an old acquaintance. It would seem that this manner of acting must be natural in certain places, and especially in certain families. When I mentioned it subsequently to his relation at Saint Maurice, I did not notice that it surprised any one. I must make the most of Charrière before the approach of winter. I must be there when the chestnuts are gathered, and I must by no means lose the tranquil autumn time. 20 days hence I go into possession of the house, the grove of chestnuts, and a part of the meadows and orchards, surrendering the remainder to the farmer, together with the kitchen garden, the ground reserved for hemp, and above all the ploughed land. The part which I have retained for myself is traversed by the stream in a circular direction. It is the least profitable part of the land, but it is the most rich in shady recesses and secluded nooks. The growth of moss interferes with the hay crop, the chestnuts are too thickly planted and yield but little fruit, and no view has been opened over the long valley of the Rhone. All is wild about it, and all is abandoned. They have even neglected to clear a space between the rocks, where trees, uprooted by the winds and consumed by decay, choke up the mud and form a kind of dam. Alders and hazels, taking root therein, have made the passage impenetrable. The stream, notwithstanding, filters through all this refuse, and escapes covered with foam into a natural basin of great purity. Thence it flows on between rocks, rolls its tumbling wavelets over moss, and slackening its course far down, emerges from the shadows to glide in front of the house under a bridge of 3 fir planks. It is said that wolves, driven by the accumulating snows, come down in the winter in search of bones and the remains of the meals which are necessary to man, even in pastoral valleys. Dread of these animals has long left this abode uninhabited. For myself, it is not they whom I shall fear. May I rather be left free by man, at least in the vicinity of their dens. Letter VI. Saint Maurice, August 26, 1. A single moment suffices to transform our affections, but those moments are rare. It was yesterday. I deferred writing to you till the morrow. I did not wish this perturbation to subside so quickly. I felt myself on the point of getting in touch with something real. I experienced, as it might be, joy. I let myself go. It is always good to feel what that means. Do not laugh at me because I behaved for a whole day as if I had lost my reason. I was very near, I assure you, being such a simpleton as not to have kept up my absurdity for a quarter of an hour. As I was entering Saint Maurice, a travelling coach drove up slowly, and several persons alighted at the bridge. You will know already that a woman was of the number. My French guise apparently attracted notice. She bowed to me. Her mouth is full. Her glance. As to her figure, as to all else, I know as little of these as of her age. About all this I am not anxious. It may even be that she is not remarkably pretty. I did not observe the inn to which they were going, but I remained at Saint Maurice. Mine host, the same whom I stay with always, must, I suppose, have placed me at the same table because they are French. If I recollect, he suggested it. You may guess whether I ordered something choice for dessert, so that I might offer it. I passed the remainder of the day by the Rhone. They are leaving this morning for Sion on the road to Luc, where one of the party is going to take the baths. It is said to be a lovely road. How astonishing is the dejection in which a man of some natural power allows his life to waste when so little can draw him from his apathy. Do you think that any one who reaches man's estate without having fallen in love has truly entered into the mysteries of life, that his heart can be really known to him, or the extent of his existence unveiled? It seems to me that he has remained in a state of deprivation, and has only beheld from afar what the world might have been for him. I make no reserve with you. You at least will not say, "See now, he is in love." May that foolish remark, which either renders him who speaks it ridiculous, or him of whom it is spoken, be never uttered concerning me, I trust, by other than fools. When one or two glasses of punch have dissolved our mistrust, and have imparted to our ideas that impulsion which sustains us, we believe that thenceforward we shall exhibit more force of character, and live under less constraint. But tomorrow morning we are a trifle more self-weary than usual. Were the weather not stormy, I scarcely know how I should get through the day, but thunder resounds already among the rocks, and the wind is rising rapidly. Much do I love this trouble of the air. If it rain in the afternoon, it will freshen the atmosphere, and at worst I shall read by the fire. The courier, who will be due in an hour, should bring me books from Lausanne, where I have subscribed to a library, but if he forgets me, I shall fare the better, and the time will have passed all the same. I will write to you, provided only that I can pick up courage to begin. End of section 9. Section 10 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 857 to 1942. First year, letters 7 and 8. Letter 7, Saint Maurice, September 3, 1. I have visited the regions of the everlasting snow on the Dent du Midi. Ere the sun appeared in the valley, I had scaled already the massive rock which commands the town, and had crossed the partly cultivated table land at the summit. I continued my way along a steep slope through dense forests of fir trees, where the way was frequently heaped with the leaves of the winters of old. Prolific decay, prodigious and confused collection of vegetation, dying and reborn from its old ruins. At 8 o'clock I attained the naked peak which towers above this slope, and constitutes the first considerable platform of the astounding pile, from the apex of which I was still very far away. At this point I sent back my guide and fared onward, trusting to my own unaided powers. I was disinclined to let any commercial leaven adulterate my alpine freedom, or any dweller in the plains diminish the austerity of so wild a region. Exposed thus alone to obstacles and perils of an arduous kind, I felt all my nature expand, far from the artificial shackles and skilful oppression of men. With a species of voluptuous fortitude, I saw the only man whom I was likely to meet with among those tremendous precipices rapidly disappearing below. I laid aside on the ground my watch, my money, whatever I carried about me, with the greater part of my clothing, and went away without taking the trouble to secrete them. You will therefore remark that my very first act of independence was one of eccentricity at the least, and I might be compared to those children who, subjected to excessive restraint, commit nothing but follies when left to themselves. I confess that there may well have been a certain puerility in my haste to abandon everything in my novel equipment, but after all I went more at my ease, and in most cases gripping between my teeth the branch which I had cut to assist me in my descents. I commenced with my hands to scale the rocky crest which joins this inferior summit to the chief eminence. Very often I crept between two abysses, the bottom of which I could not see. In this manner I reached the granite heights. I had been assured by my guide that I could ascend no farther, and as a fact I was for a long time brought to a standstill, but in the end I discovered by making a slight descent more practicable paths, and clambering them with all the hardihood of a mountaineer, I reached a species of basin filled with frozen snow, which the summer heat has never succeeded in dissolving. Beyond this I climbed a good deal, but, arrived at the foot of the highest declivity, I failed to attain the summit, the face of which could scarcely be called inclined, while it soared above the point I had reached, apparently some 500 feet. Though I had crossed little of the snow, as I had taken no precautions against it, my eyes were tired by its glare, scorched by the reflection of the noonday sun from its frozen surface, and I could barely distinguish objects. Moreover, many of the heights which I perceived are unknown to me, and I could be sure of the most conspicuous only. Since I came into Switzerland, I have read nothing but Saussure, Bury, the Tableau de la Suisse, and so forth, but I am still a great stranger in the Alps. I could have no doubt all the same about the gigantic summit of Mont Blanc, which rose up in evidence before me, that of Velan, another more remote and exalted, which I suppose to be Mont Rosa, and the Dent de Morcle on the farther side of the valley, facing me close at hand, but lower down, beyond the abysses. The height which I had failed to scale did much to interfere with what is perhaps the most striking part of this vast perspective, for behind it stretched the long profundities of Valais, bordered on either side by the glaciers of Sanetz, Lauterbrunnen, and the Pennines, and terminated by the domes of Gothard and of Titlis, the snows of Furka, and the pyramids of Schreckhorn and Finster Aarhorn. But this prospect of mountain tops invaded by the feet of man This view so grand, so impressive, removed so far from the monotonous nullity of landscapes in the plains far down, was not what I sought, all the same, in untrammeled nature, in the hushed immobility, in the pure air. At lower levels it is inevitable that the natural man should be subject to continual mutation, breathing a social atmosphere so dense, so stormy, so full of ferment, in continual perturbation from the clamour of the arts, the jar of pretended pleasures, the cries of hatred, and the everlasting moanings of anxiety and suffering. But up there, on those desert peaks, where the sky is more vast and the air more stable, where time flies slower and life has more of permanence, there does all nature proclaim with eloquence a lordlier order, a more visible harmony, an eternal unison. There is the form of man, adaptable and yet indestructible. He breathes the wild air far away from social emanations. He belongs to himself and to the universe, and lives with a true life in the glorious unity. This was the experience which I desired, this at least which I sought. Deficient in confidence of myself amidst an order of affairs arranged at enormous expenditure by ingenious children, I went up to demand of nature why I am amiss in the midst of them. In a word, I would ascertain whether my existence is alien in the human order, or whether the actual social regimen is receding from the everlasting harmony as a kind of irregularity or accidental exception in the movement of the world. Now, at length, I feel sure of myself. There are moments which scatter distrust, prejudgments, uncertainties, when we know that which is by an autocratic and unalterable conviction. Be it so, therefore. Miserable and almost ridiculous, I shall live upon an earth enslaved by the caprices of this ephemeral world, opposing to my weariness the conviction which sets me inwardly in proximity to man as he might be. And if there should cross my path some inflexible character whose nature, formed on the primordial model, cannot be made passive to social imprints, should the chance of things, I say, permit me to meet with such a man, be sure that we shall understand one another. He will be surrendered to me, and I shall be his for ever. Our relations with the world at large will be transferred to one another, and free of the rest of our race, and pitying their empty necessities, we shall pursue, if it be possible, a more natural and more equal life. Who could affirm, all the same, that it would be one of greater happiness, devoid as it must remain of harmony with outward things, and encompassed by the suffering nations? No words of mine could impart to you a just notion of this new world, nor express the immutability of the mountains in a language of the plains. The hours seem to me at once more tranquil and more fruitful, and as though the revolution of the stars had been slackened in this all-holding calm, I discerned in the measured pace and intensity of my thought a sequence which nothing precipitated, while it yet outstripped its normal course. When I sought to compute its duration, I found that the sun had not kept pace with it, and I concluded that the consciousness of existence is in reality more burdensome and barren in the whirl of the haunts of men. I perceived that, in spite of the tardiness of apparent motions, it is among the mountains, in the repose of their peaks, that thought, less harried, is more truly active. The man of the valleys consumes without enjoying his unquiet and fretful span, like those insects ever on the wing who expend their efforts in vain gyrations, to be left behind by others no stronger but more tranquil in their direct and sustained flight. The day was torrid, the horizon was fuliginous, the valleys were vaporous, the glister of the glaciers filled the lower atmosphere with their luminous reflections, but an unknown purity seemed essential to the air which I breathed. At this altitude no exhalation from beneath, no accident of light ruffled or divided the vague and sombre profundities of the heavens. Their apparent colour was no longer that pale and luminous blue, their soft vesture on the plains a grateful and delicate combination, forming for the habitable earth a visible circumference whereon the eye can linger and rest. Here the indiscernible ether allowed sight to lose itself in limitless immensity, amidst the glory of the sun and of the icy peaks, to go in search of other worlds, other suns, as under the vast sky at night, and beyond the atmosphere kindled with the fires of day, to penetrate a nocturnal universe. Vapours rose insensibly from the glaciers and formed clouds under my feet. The snowy brilliance no longer tired my eyes, and the sky became still more sombre, still more profound. A mist covered the Alps. Some isolated peaks alone issued from that sea of vapours. Brilliant streaks of snow, retained in their rugged clefts, made the granite masses more black and austere by contrast. The hoary dome of Mont Blanc lifted its irremovable mass above that ashen and shifting ocean, above those crowded hazes rent by winds and cast up in immense billows. A black point showed suddenly in their abysses, rapid in motion, coming straight toward me. It was the mighty eagle of the Alps, with dripping wings and ravenous eye, seeking for prey, but at the sight of man he took flight with an ominous scream, and casting himself into the clouds, he vanished. That cry was re-echoed some score of times by harsh noises devoid of all protraction, like so many isolated cries in the universal silence. Thereafter all subsided into absolute calm, as if sound itself had ceased to be, as if the quality of sonorous bodies had been erased from the universe. Never has true silence fallen on the unresting vales. Alone on the chill peaks there reigns this immobility, this solemn permanence, which tongue can never express, imagination never attain. Save for memories brought up from the plains, it would seem impossible for man to believe that outside himself there could be any movement in nature. The course of the stars would be inexplicable, and even to the mutations of the clouds all would appear to abide, even amidst change itself. Each present moment seeming unbroken, he would have the certitude, but never the sensation, of the succession of things, and the everlasting variations of the universe would be an impenetrable mystery to his thought. I could have wished to have preserved some surer record, not of my general impressions amidst these spheres of muteness, for they will in no wise be forgotten, but of the ideas which they occasioned, and of these there is scarcely any trace in my memory. In places so exceptional, imagination can with difficulty recall an order of thought which seems to set aside all present objects. It would have been necessary to write down what I experienced, but then I should have speedily ceased to feel after an unusual manner. In this anxiety for the preservation of thought, so as to recover it subsequently, there is something of servility, akin to the cares of a dependent life. Very seldom in the moments of energy do we give heed to other times and persons, to factitious conventions, to renown, or even public usefulness. We are more natural, and do not think even of redeeming the actual moment, do not hold our ideas under command, have no wish to reflect, do not coerce the mind to investigate any subject, manifest secret things, or find out what remains unexpressed. Thought is not active and regulated, but passive or liberated. We dream and surrender ourselves, are profound apart from reason, great without enthusiasm, energetic independently of will. We muse, but we do not meditate. Be not therefore astonished that I have nothing to impart to you after 6 or more hours of sensations and ideas, which the whole course of my life may possibly never bring back. You know those people of Dauphiné were frustrated in their design when they went botanizing with Rousseau. After reaching a summit which by its position seemed adapted to kindle poetic genius, they awaited some choice flower of eloquence, but the author of Julia took his seat on the ground, toyed with some blades of grass, and said nothing. It might have been 5 o'clock when I noticed how the shadows had lengthened, and experienced some cold in the corner open to the west where I had remained motionless so long upon the granite. I felt unable to move, and the way was long and arduous among scarps like those. The mists had melted, and I saw that it was a beautiful evening even in the valleys. Had the vapours thickened, I should have been in a real danger, but the fact had not occurred to me till that moment. The stratum of grosser air which envelops the earth seemed quite foreign to me after the pure air that I had breathed on the confines of the ether. All prudence had forsaken me, as if this also were a convention of the artificial life. As I returned to the habitable earth, I felt that I was reassuming the long chain of anxieties and weariness. When I arrived, it was 10 o'clock. The moon was looking in at my window. The Rhone flowed noisily, but there was no wind, and all in the town were asleep. I dreamed of the mountains which I had left, of Charrière, where I was to live, of the freedom to which I had laid claim. Letter 8, Saint-Maurice, September 14, 1. I am back from a sojourn of many days in the mountains. Of this I shall say nothing. I have other things to tell you. I met, however, with one overwhelming situation, and promised myself to revisit it frequently. It is at no great distance from Saint-Maurice. Before retiring to rest, I broke the seal of a letter which was not in your writing. The word immediate, written in large characters, occasioned me some concern. All seems suspicious to him who has freed himself with difficulty from long enduring bondage. In seclusion like mine, no alteration could be otherwise than repugnant. I had nothing advantageous to anticipate, and I might well have much to fear. You will, I think, have little difficulty in divining the purport of that communication. For myself, I was borne down, overwhelmed. At first I decided to ignore all, to rise above all, to surrender definitely whatsoever might hold me to the things which I have left. Nevertheless, after many doubts, better grounded or more infirm, I seem to recognize the necessity of sacrificing a certain proportion of time so as to assure my immunity in the future. Therefore I yield. Charrière I abandon, and I am preparing to set out. We will discuss the untoward affair. This morning I could not tolerate the thought of so great a change, and I even had recourse to further deliberations. In the end I repaired to Charrière to make other arrangements and announce my departure. There at length I reached an unalterable decision. My desire was to banish the image of the approaching season, and of the weariness which already began to weigh upon me. I was in the meadows, which were being mown for the last time. I paused to rest upon a rock, where I could see the sky only, and this was veiled in thick mists. I beheld the chestnut trees. I looked on the falling leaves. Then I approached the brook, as if I feared that this also had become dry, but it ran the same forever. Inscrutable compulsion of human things. I go to Lyons, and afterwards I shall go to Paris. So much for what has been settled. Farewell. Compassionate the man who finds so little, and from whom even this little is taken away. To conclude, at least we shall meet at Lyons. End of section 10. Section 11 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. First year, letter 9. Second year, letter 10. Letter 9, Lyons, October 22, 1. I left for Météville 2 days after your departure from Lyons. There I spent 18 days. You know what anxieties encompass me, and by what sordid miseries I am embarrassed, without any compensation that I can promise myself as the result of all. But awaiting a letter which could not come to hand for a fortnight, I went to while away this period at Météville. If I am unable to remain apathetic and unruffled amidst the weariness with which I am compelled to concern myself, and the issue of which appears to be dependent on me, I at least feel capable of forgetting it absolutely as soon as I can do nothing in regard to it. I know how to await the future with equanimity, whatever may impend, from the moment that the distress of anticipating it, taxing no longer my immediate vigilance, permits me to suspend memory and avert thought therefrom. In fact, I should scarcely seek for the palmiest days of my life a deeper peace than the immunity of this brief interval. It has been snatched, notwithstanding, between solicitudes, the issue of which cannot be foreseen. And after what manner? By means so simple that they would excite laughter in many who will never know such repose. The place of itself is unimportant and more retired than impressive in its situation. You are familiar with its owners, their characters, their way of life, their unaffected friendliness, their endearing manners. I visited them at a fortunate moment. They were to begin on the morrow the harvesting of the grapes upon a great trellis open to the south and looking towards the forest of Armand. It was arranged over the supper table that these grapes, designed for a special vintage, should be gathered by our hands alone, and with such care that the fruit less advanced should be allowed a few extra days for maturing. The next morning, accordingly, when the mist had somewhat lifted, I placed a winnowing fan on a wheelbarrow and was the first in the heart of the vineyard to start the harvesting. I was almost alone in my labour, and sought for no speedier method, preferring this dilatory way. The advent of any fellow worker brought me a regretful feeling. The harvesting lasted, I think, 12 days. My barrow passed and repassed over the neglected ways carpeted with moist grass. I chose the most scattered, the most difficult, and thus the hours slipped by in oblivion amidst the autumn sunshine, all among mists and fruit. And then, when the evening came, we brewed our tea with milk still warm from the cow, laughed at those who go in pursuit of pleasures, strayed under the old yoke elm hedges, and retired to our rest, contented. I have beheld the vanities of life, and I bear within me the fiery principle of colossal passions. I bear also the consciousness of the grandeurs of social things, and I confess to the philosophical order. I have studied Marcus Aurelius without any astonishment at his maxims. I can conceive the austere virtues and even the monastic heroism. All this can animate my soul, yet fill it not. The barrow, which I heap up with grapes and wheel at leisure, sustains it better. It seems to carry my hours peaceably, as if this slow and serviceable motion, this measured progress, were adapted to the common habit of my life. Letter 10, Paris, June 20, 2nd year. Nothing comes to an issue. The miserable business which holds me in durance here drags on from day to day, and the more I chafe at the procrastination, the more doubtful the end becomes. Men of business pursue their objects with the coolness of persons who are inured to impediments, and relish in addition a tardy and embarrassed progress, which reflects credit on their mental astuteness and is well suited to their private stratagems. I should have more evil to recount to you if they were guilty of less to me. Besides, you know what I think of this vocation, which I have never swerved from regarding as the most questionable or baneful of all. A lawyer is now leading me from complication to complication. Believing that I also must be self-interested and devoid of rectitude, he traffics for his own side. By outwearying me with delays and formalities, he fancies that he will drive me to grant what I cannot accord because I do not possess it. Hence, after passing 6 months at Lyons against my will, I am still fated to spend perhaps as many here. Meanwhile, the year glides on. There is one more to blot out from my existence. I lost the spring almost without a murmur, but summer in Paris. Part of the time I spend over the abominations inseparable from what is termed looking after one's affairs, and afterwards, when I would be in peace for the rest of the day and have recourse to my lodging as a kind of asylum against all this long-drawn weariness, I find another weariness more intolerable still. There I am in silence, which is in the midst of riot, and I alone have nothing to do in a turbulent world. There is no mean here between utter unrest and inaction. One is bound to be weary in the absence of business or the passions. I am in occupation of a room shaken by the perpetual reverberation of every species of clamour, by every craft and disquiet of an indefatigable people. Beneath my window there is a kind of market-place swarming with quacks, jugglers, fruit-sellers, and hawkers of all descriptions. Over against me is the high wall of some public edifice on which the sun glares from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until evening. This dazzling and barren pile cuts off the blue sky sharply, and the brightest days are for me the most insufferable. One persistent vendor shouts the names of his newspapers, his harsh and unvaried voice seeming to add to the aridity of this sun-scorched place, and if I hear a laundress singing at her window under the roof, I lose patience and go out. For 3 days past, a crippled and ulcerous mendicant has located himself at the corner of a street close by me, soliciting alms with uplifted and lachrymose voice for 12 long hours at a stretch. Imagine the effect of this wailing, reiterated at equal intervals through days of unbroken sunshine. Till he changes his post, I must henceforth remain the whole day out of doors. Yet whither can I repair? Here I know very few people, and among so few it would be a great chance if I should meet with one to my taste. As for the public resorts, there are many that are very fine in Paris, but not one which I can frequent for half an hour without finding it tedious. I know of nothing which so burdens our days as this everlasting dilatoriness of all things. One is kept incessantly in a state of expectation, and life slips away before it is possible to reach the point at which living can be pretended to begin. Notwithstanding, about what shall I complain? How few are the people who do not squander their existence, and what of those who pass it in dungeons provided by the mercy of the laws? How can any one endure to go on living when he has to drag out 20 years of his youth in a prison? He can form no conception how long he must still remain there, were even the hour of emancipation at hand. I forgot those who would not dare end it of their own accord. Men at least have not permitted them to die, and we dare to lament over our own lot. End of section 11. Section 12 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Second year, letters 11 and 12. Letter 11, Paris, June 27, 2. I pass fairly often a couple of hours in the library, not exactly for my instruction, that ambition cools sensibly, but because, knowing scarcely how to fill up the time which, for all that, glides on irreparably, I find it less irksome when I employ it outside than when I wear it away indoors. Pursuits which are to some extent regulated are more in consonance with my dejection than an excess of license which would leave me inert. I experience greater tranquillity among persons who are silent like myself than when alone amidst a boisterous crowd. I am drawn towards those long halls, some vacant, some peopled by assiduous students, that antique and chill storehouse of human efforts and of all human vanities. When I dip into Bougainville, Chardin, La Loubière, I become imbued with the old memory of time-worn lands, with the rumour of far-off wisdom, or the youth of the Fortunate Isles, but at length forgetting Persepolis, Benares, and Tinian itself, I focus times and places at the actual point whence human faculties perceive them all. I behold those eager minds who acquire in silence and toil, whilst the eternal oblivion, rolling over their learned and spell-bound heads, brings close inevitable death, and prepares to obliterate in one instant of nature their existence, their thought, and their age. The halls encircle a long, peaceful, grassy court, with a few statues, a cluster of ruins, and a basin of green water, seemingly as old as the effigies. I leave rarely without pausing for a few minutes in this hushed enclosure. I love to muse as I stray over time-worn stones which were once drawn from their quarries to provide for the feet of man a dry surface free of all vegetation, but time and solitude have replaced them in a sense beneath the earth by covering them with new soil and restoring to the ground its vegetation and the hues of its natural complexion. I find these stones occasionally more eloquent than the books which I have been just admiring. When consulting the encyclopedia yesterday, I opened the volume at a page which I was not looking for, and I have now forgotten the article, but it told how a man, outworn by perturbations and mischances, betook himself to absolute solitude by one of those determinations which overcome impediments and are food for daily self-congratulation at the possession of a will with sufficient fortitude to make them. The conception of this independent life has recalled to my imagination not the untrammeled solitudes of Emmaus, not the soft isles of the Pacific, not the less inaccessible Alps, already regretted so much, but a distinct memory has presented to me, and after a striking manner, and with a kind of wonder and inspiration, the arid rocks and the woods of Fontainebleau. I feel that I must speak to you further of a place which is to some extent exotic in the heart of our countrysides. You will then realize better why it is so strongly endeared to me. You are aware that, while still young, I made a stay of some years at Paris. The relations with whom I lived, notwithstanding their attachment to the city, frequently spent the month of September with friends in the country. One year they stayed in this manner at Fontainebleau, and twice subsequently we visited the same people, who at that time lived on the borders of the forest in the vicinity of the river bank. I believe that I was 14, 15, and 17 years old respectively when I thus made acquaintance with Fontainebleau. After a stay at home, slothful and tedious childhood, if I felt myself a man in certain respects, I was yet a boy in many others. Shy, hesitating, prescient perhaps of everything, but knowing nothing, alien to that which surrounded me, I had no other decided characteristics than those of unrest and unhappiness. On the occasion of my first sojourn, I never went alone into the forest. I recall little that I experienced, but am convinced that I preferred it to anything that I had ever beheld, and it was the only place which I had any wish to revisit. The year following, I scoured the solitudes eagerly, happy when I had lost purposely all trace of my road and could discern no beaten track. If I reached any limit of the forest, I beheld with regret the vast bare plains beyond it, and noted the steeples in the distance. I retired quickly, plunged once more into the heart of the woodland, and then, if I came upon a clearing encompassed on all sides, where I could see only sand heaps and junipers, I experienced a sensation of peace, of freedom, of wild exultation, the power of nature realized for the first time at an age which is quick to happiness. At the same time, I was not gay, and falling short of full felicity, I had rather an emotion of comfort. I grew weary through enjoyment, and returned depressed invariably. On many occasions I was in the forest before sunrise. I clambered summits still in shadow. I drenched myself amongst heather wet with dew, and then, as the sun appeared, I regretted the dubious light which went before the dawn. I delighted in the morasses, the darksome valleys, the dense woods. I loved the little heath-grown eminences. I loved hugely the stony fragments, the crumbling rocks, and more than all those shifting sands where no foot of man left its impress on the barren surface, furrowed here and there by the hurried track of flying hind or hare. When I heard the scamper of a squirrel, when I started a hare, it was better still, and for a moment I asked no more. This was the period when I first remarked the birch, that solitary tree, which then saddened me, and now I never encounter without pleasure. I love the birch. I love its white, smooth, and crannied bark, its rustic trunk, its branches drooping towards the ground, the quivering of its leaves, and all its air of abandonment, its natural simplicity, its modest aspect. Times lost, yet not to be forgotten. Too vain illusion of excessive sensibility. How grand is man in his inexperience! How productive would he be if the chilling glance of his kind, if the withering breath of injustice came not to harden his heart! What I needed was happiness. What I was born for was suffering. You know those funereal days, close upon the hoar-frost season, when daybreak itself, condensing the mists, announces the coming of light only through ominous tints of a fiery hue falling on gathering clouds. That darksome veil, those stormy squalls, those pallid gleams, those pipings of winds among bending and shuddering trees, those long-drawn shrieks like funereal lamentations, of such is the morning of life. At noon, more icy and persistent tempests. At evening, the darkness deepened, and the day of man is over. The specious infinite illusion engendered with the heart of man, and seeming of like duration as himself, revived once. I went so far as to believe that I might know of satisfied desires. This sudden and ardent flame flared up in the void and died down without illuminating anything. So in the season of tempests, the sudden lightnings startle the black night and terrify all that lives. It was the month of March. I was at So. The violets were in bloom under the hedgerows, and lilacs in a little vernal and peaceful meadow open towards the noonday sun. The house was above, much higher up, and a terraced garden impeded the view of the windows. Below the meadow were steep rocks, straight as walls. At the bottom there was a mighty torrent, and further still were other rocks, clothed with verdure, hedges, and pine trees. The ancient walls of the town traversed the scene, with the owl in their crumbling towers. In the evening the moon shone, horns answered one another in the distance, and that voice which I shall hear no more. All this has undone me. My life as yet has known only that single error. Why, therefore, this recollection of Fontainebleau, and not that of So? Letter 12, July 28 II. I conceive myself to be at length in the desert. There are tracks hereabout where no trace of men is to be found. I am ravished for a season from those turbid cares which devour man's little space, confusing his life with the blank which precedes it and the blank that follows it, leaving it no further prerogative than to be itself a less placid nothingness. When through the evening twilight I traversed the length of the forest and descended to Valvin, beneath those trees in that silence, I seemed on the point of being lost among torrents, morasses, romantic and appalling places. What I found were hillocks of sandstone, meagre outlines, a level region which could scarcely be called picturesque, but silence, abandonment, and sterility have sufficed me. Can you appreciate the delight which I experience when my foot sinks into a shifting and scorching sand, where progression is difficult, where there are no waters, no coolness, no shadow? I behold a silent and uncultivated expanse, ruinous, disfigured, chaotic rocks, and the powers of nature given over to the power of time. Is it not as if I were at peace when outside me, under the ardent sky, I find other hindrances and other excesses than those of my own heart? I seek not to know where I am. On the contrary, I lose myself when that is possible. Very often I pursue a straight line, taking no notice of beaten tracks, doing my best to ignore directions and not to become familiar with the forests, so that I may always have something to discover in it. There is one road which it is my special pleasure to follow. Like the forest itself, it takes the form of a circle, so that it leads neither to plain nor town. It describes no ordinary course. It is neither of the valleys nor of the heights. It appears to have no end and to go nowhere. I feel that I am following it all my life. One is bound, you will say, to return in the evening, and you jest at my so-called solitude. But you deceive yourself. You think that I am at Fontainebleau, in a village or in a cottage. Nothing of the sort. In such places as this I care for the country seats no more than the villages, and for the villages no more than the towns. If I condemn ostentation, I detest squalor. Were it otherwise, I should have done better to remain at Paris, for there I should have found both. Now here is a point which I did not mention in my last letter, filled as it was with the ferment which works at times within me. Once in the past, while exploring these woods, I came in a thicket upon two hinds, flying from a wolf, who was hard on them, and must, it would have seemed, overtake them. I advanced from the same side to watch the struggle and give help if possible. They dashed out of the wood into an open space where there were rocks and brushwood, but on my coming up they were lost to sight. I explored all parts of this species of ridged and irregular waste, where much freestone had once been quarried for paving, but I discovered nothing. Taking another direction to plunge again into the forest, I encountered a dog, who watched me at first in silence and only barked when I moved away from him. I had paused, in fact, almost on the threshold of the dwelling which he guarded. It was a sort of underground cavern, part of which was enclosed naturally by the rocks, and part by piles of freestones, branches of juniper, and heaps of bracken and moss. An artisan who for more than 30 years had been a stone hewer in the neighbourhood quarries, and was devoid of property or family, had retired thither to abandon compulsory toil before he was abandoned by life, and to escape humiliation and the hospitals. I saw that he possessed a cupboard. Hard by his particular rock he cultivated a few vegetables in a very barren soil, living thus, with his dog and his cat, on bread, water, and freedom. I have done hard work, he said to me, and have never possessed anything, but in the end I have found peace, and for the rest I shall die before long. Thus was human history summed up to me by this humble man. Could he be aware of the fact? Did he think that any one was happier? Did he suffer by comparing himself with others? Into these points I made no inquiry. I was very young at the time. I was fascinated by his rustic and half-civilized air. When I offered him a crown, he accepted it, saying that he would be able to buy some wine. And I must confess that this intention diminished my esteem. Wine, I exclaimed to myself, there are surely more serviceable things. Possibly wine and misconduct have brought him to this pass, rather than the love of solitude. Your pardon, simple man and unfortunate solitary. Not yet had I learned that one may drink oblivion of sorrows. I know now the bitterness which afflicts and the loathings which consume our powers, and I can respect one whose most crying need is to cease for a moment from sorrowing. Rather, I am indignant at hearing the man of an easy life upbraid an unfortunate severely for drinking wine when he is wanting bread. What soul have such persons received if they know not a keener pang than that of being hungry? You can now understand the force of the recollection which returned to me unexpectedly in the library. I was inspired by this sudden idea with all the feeling of a real life, of a wise simplicity, of the independence of humanity in the midst of a nature which belongs to it. Do not suppose that I mistake my present existence for a life of this kind, or that I look upon myself as a man after nature, here in the midst of my sandstones and surrounded by sorry plains. After the fashion of a dweller in the Quartier Saint Paul, I might as well show my neighbours the rural beauties of a pot of mignonette beneath the eaves of a window box full of parsley, or dignify half a rood of ground circled by a brook with the names of the promontories and seaboard solitudes belonging to another hemisphere, so as to recall grand associations and remote customs amidst the stucco and thatched roofs of a rural parish. But seeing that my fate is invariably to be waiting for life, I endeavour to vegetate absolutely alone and isolated. I have preferred very much to spend 4 months in this manner than to lose them at Paris in other puerilities which are at once greater and more sordid. I must tell you when we meet how I have chosen a manor, and how I have farmed it, how I have thither transported my few effects without letting any one into my secret, how I support existence on a few vegetables and fruits, where I find my water, how I am clothed against the wet, and all my varied provisions for safeguarding my concealment, so that no Parisian passing 8 days in the country can come hither to scoff at me. You also laugh, but that I condone, for your mirth is not like theirs, and I have myself forestalled your humour. I find all the same that this sort of life possesses great charms. When the better to appreciate its advantages, I sally out of the forest, betake myself to the cultivated lands, and observe at a distance some pretentious mansions situated in the open country. When after a weary and barren league I perceive 100 cottages crowded hideously together, where streets, stables, and kitchen, gardens, walls, ceilings, and dripping roof, even to garments and furniture, are permeated by the same squalor, in which all the women yell, the children scream, and the men sweat. And if I search through so much degradation and misery for some element of moral peace, some vestige of religious hopes for these unfortunates, I find for the patriarch of the place a rapacious priest soured by disappointment and separated too soon from the world, or otherwise some morose young man without dignity, wisdom, or unction, who commands no respect, whose way of life is well known, who damns the erring without consoling the good. And for the one symbol of hope and of concord, a sign of terror and abnegation, an anomalous emblem, the melancholy survival of antique and great institutions which have become miserably perverted. There are men, notwithstanding, by whom all this is taken tranquilly, not dreaming that it is capable of being approached from another point of view. O sad and vain conceit of a better world, unspeakable longing of love, regret for times which pass and produce nothing, universal sentiment, sustain and absorb my life. What would it be devoid of thy sinister beauty? In thee is it felt, and by thee will perish. Yet a few times under the autumn sky, in these last fine days which mists suffuse with vagueness, seated by the waters which bear away the yellow leaf, let me hear the simple and profound accents of a primitive melody. Ascending Grimsel or Titlis, alone with the dweller in the mountains, let me hear one day on the short grass with the snows hard by, the familiar romantic sounds of Underwalden and Hasle. Once before death, may I there say in the ear of one who will understand me, if we only had lived. End of section 12. Section 13 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Second year, letters 13 and 14. Letter 13, Fontainebleau, July 31 2. When some invincible sentiment takes us far from the things which we possess, and fills us at first with ravishment, and then with regret, giving glimpses of felicities which nothing can really impart, this profound though transient sensation is but an inward witness to the superiority of our faculties over our destiny. It is for this very reason so brief and converted so quickly into regret. It is first delicious, then agonizing. All extravagant impulse is followed by dejection. We are not that which we might be, and hence we suffer. Yet did we find ourselves in the midst of that order which our aspirations seek and miss, we should possess no longer this excess of desire, this superfluity of gifts. We should enjoy no more the pleasure of being greater than our destinies, above that which environs us, more productive than we are required to be. In the fruition of those delights which our imagination conceives so ardently, we should remain frigid and often preoccupied, indifferent, even wearied, because it is impossible for any one to be really more than himself, because we are confronted then by the infrangible limit assigned by the nature of things, and our faculties, engrossed by actualities, avail no longer to transport us into the beyond, the imagined region of ideal objects, under the empire of the real man. But why should such objects be ideal exclusively? It is this which I fail to comprehend. Why is that which has no actual existence more in consonance with our nature than that which is? Positive life is also as a dream merely. It is this which is void of coherence, of sequence, of end. Definitive and fixed elements it does indeed possess, but there are others also which belong only to chance and discord, which melt like shadows, and in which no one finds that which he anticipates. Thus, in our sleep, we encounter things which are true and consequent simultaneously with others which are fantastic, disjointed, chimerical, but are yet interweaved, I know not how, with the former. A similar medley makes up the dreams of night and the sensations of day. Antique wisdom has affirmed that the hour of waking will at length arrive. Letter 14. Fontainebleau, August 7, 2. M. W., whom you know, remarked recently, when drinking my cup of coffee, I arranged the world to admiration. I also encourage this kind of dreaming, and as I rove through the brushwood among still humid junipers, I surprise myself sometimes picturing men who are happy. I assure you it seems to me that they might be so. I have no desire to constitute another species or a new globe. I have no wish to reform everything. Such hypotheses lead nowhere, say you, since they are without application to what is known. Very well, take what exists necessarily, take it just as it is, rearranging the accidental only. I ask for no chimerical or novel species. Here are my materials, after which I fashion my scheme in accordance with the conception in my mind. I stipulate for two things, a settled climate and true men. If I knew when the rain would cause the rivers to overflow, when the sun would scorch up my plants, when the hurricane would demolish my house, it would be for my diligence to cope with the natural forces which are hostile to my needs. But if I am in the dark as to their advent, if mischances overtake me without any warning of danger, if prudence may itself be my ruin, if the interests of others confided to my charge forbid me carelessness and deny me even security, is not my life inevitably one of solicitude and wretchedness? Is it not equally inevitable that inaction should follow enforced labour, and that, as Voltaire has so well observed, I should consume all my days either in feverish activity or in the lethargy of weariness? If men are for the most part dissemblers, if the duplicity of some must compel others, at the very least, to cautiousness, is it not unavoidable that with the necessary evil which numbers seek to inflict upon their fellows for their personal advantage, there should be combined a much greater proportion of useless miseries? Is it not unavoidable that men should by turns torment one another in their own despite, that all should look askance at all, each be forearmed against each, that enemies should be full of devices and friends of wariness? Does it not follow that a single heedless action or one false judgment may ruin the man of good intentions in the public esteem? That an enmity originating in a groundless suspicion may become fatal? That those who seek to do well are disheartened? That false principles take root? That trickery is more profitable than wisdom, heroism, or high-mindedness, that children reproach their fathers for not having played the roue, and that states perish because they have abstained from a crime. In this perpetual uncertainty, I would ask what becomes of morality, and again in this uncertainty of all, what becomes of surety? Without surety, without morality, I ask whether happiness is not a dream of childhood. The moment of death should continue to remain unknown. There is no evil apart from duration, and for a score of other reasons death must not be included in the number of misfortunes. It is well to be in ignorance of the hour wherein all must end. What it is certain that we cannot accomplish, we initiate but rarely. Taking man, therefore, pretty well as he is, I should require that his ignorance as to the length of life should be useful rather than disadvantageous. But uncertainty as to the things of existence is not like that of their ending. One event which you have been unable to foresee disorders your scheme and has persistent crosses in store for you. Death, on the other hand, in place of impeding, simply destroys your plan, and you can suffer nothing as to that of which you will know nothing. The schemes of those who survive it may perhaps obstruct, but sufficient is the certitude which concerns a man's own affairs, and I am far from presupposing unmixed good in the things of our race. I should misdoubt a world of my planning if it left no room for evil, and to depict a perfect harmony would fill me only with a species of horror. Such anomalies, as it seems to me, are not tolerated by nature. An assured climate and true men, inevitably true, these suffice me. If I know things as they are, I am happy. I leave to heaven its tornadoes and tempests, to earth its mire and dust, to the ground its barrenness, to our bodies their weakness and degeneration, to men their disparities and incompatibilities, their inconstancy, their shortcomings, their vices even, and their unavoidable egotism, to time its tardiness and irrepealability. Happy is the city wherein things are ordered duly, wherein thoughts are known. Beyond these it needs merely good legislation, and it is impossible that this should be wanting if thoughts are known. End of section 13. Section 14 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Second year, letters 15, 16, and 17. Letter 15, Fontainebleau, August 9 2. Amongst a few portable volumes which I have brought with me here, why I can scarcely tell, I have come across the ingenious romance of Frosine et Melidor. At first I skimmed, then read it, and the end I have read a second time. There are seasons for sorrows, when we love to go in search of them within us, to probe their depths and to marvel at their unmeasured proportions. We experiment, at least, amidst our human miseries, with that infinite which we would ascribe to our shadow before a breath of time effaces it. That pitiable moment, that disastrous situation, that nocturnal death amidst mysterious delights, all amidst those darksome hazes, what love, what loss, what terrifying vendettas, and that rending of a betrayed heart when Frosine, battling with the waves to reach the rock and torch, lured on by a faithless beacon, perishes exhausted in the vast sea. I know of no finer catastrophe, of no death more lamentable. The day ended, and there was no moon, there was no movement. The sky was calm, the trees stirred not at all. A few insects hummed in the grass, a single bird far off sang in the warmth of evening. I sat down and so tarried a long time. I seemed to have had nothing but undefined notions. I passed in my mind through earth and its ages, and trembled at the work of man. Then I revert to myself, to find that I am in this chaos. I see my life lost therein. I forecast the future epochs of the world. Rocks of Rihi, had I only possessed your depths! The night had now deepened. I took my way back slowly, straying as chance directed, and filled with all weariness. I knew the whole need of tears, but I could only sigh. The primal times are over, the torments of youth are mine, but not its consolations. My heart, tormented still by the fire of an aimless existence, is dry and withered, as if from the exhaustion of an icy old age. I am quenched without being made calm. There are those who rejoice in their afflictions, but for me all has gone by. I have neither joy, nor hope, nor rest. Nothing remains to me, not even tears. Letter 16, Fontainebleau, August 12, II. What magnanimous sentiments, what memories, what peaceful majesty in a mild, calm, illuminated night! What grandeur! And yet the soul is steeped in uncertainty. She perceives that her impressions derived from external things make her subject to errors. She discerns that there are truths notwithstanding, but that these are very far away. Beneath those mighty worlds, sphered in a changeless sky, nature passes our understanding. We are confounded by the permanence therein, which is for us a terrific eternity. The things that are about us pass away, and we pass away with them, but the worlds remain. Thought is in the midst of an abyss, between the mutations of earth and the unalterable heavens. Letter 17, Fontainebleau, August 14, II. Before the sun has risen, I am up and abroad in the woods. I observe how it rises for a fine day. I plunge through bracken still wet with dew, among briars, with the hinds about me. I roam under the birch trees of Montchauvet. Some emotion of that happiness which was once possible stirs powerfully within me. It impels me and weighs me down. I rise and descend. I walk hurriedly, like one who is in quest of enjoyment. But ah, that one sigh, that mood of fancy, and then a whole day of wretchedness. End of section 14. Section 15 of Obermann. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Obermann by Étienne Pivert de Senancour, translated by Arthur Edward Waite, 1857 to 1942. Second year, letters 18, 19, and 20. Letter 18, Fontainebleau, August 17, 2. Even in this place it is only the evening that I love. The dawn, it is true, charms me, but it is for a moment only. I believe that I might realize its beauty, were it not for the length of the day which follows it. It is true that I have a free field to roam in, but it is deficient in wildness. It falls short of the august degree. It is tame in its outlines, its rocks are insignificant and monotonous. Its vegetation, for the most part, lacks that force and profusion which are needful to me. There is no roar of any torrent through inaccessible depths. It is a world of plains. Nothing overwhelms me, nothing satisfies me. If possible, my weariness increases. Surely it is because my sufferings are insufficient. Am I happier on this account? By no means. To suffer and to be unhappy are not identical conditions. To be happy and to enjoy are also not terms that can be interchanged. My condition is easy, and yet I lead a melancholy life. I could not well be better off than I am, free, tranquil, faring well, emancipated from business, indifferent as to a future from which I expect nothing, and relinquishing, without any regret, a past which I have never enjoyed. Yet there is a disquietude within me which will not depart, a want unknown which dominates and absorbs me, which takes me past all perishable existence. You are mistaken, as I was also mistaken. It is not the privation of love. There is a vast distance between the void of my heart and the love which it has desired so much, but there is the infinite between that which I am and that which I yearn to be. Love is great, it is not illimitable. I have no craving for mere enjoyment. It is hope that I ask for, it is knowledge that I would attain. Unbounded illusions are necessary to me, illusions receding ever to deceive me always. Of what consequence to me is anything that can end? The hour which 60 years hence must come for me is here already. I dislike that which impends, draws nigh, comes to pass, and then is no more. I seek a boon, a dream, in a word, a hope to go always before me, beyond me, greater than my longing itself, greater than that which passes away. I would encompass all intelligence. I would that the eternal order of the world, and 30 years since that order was, but I had no part therein. Fleeting and futile accident, I existed not, and again I shall not exist. I realize with astonishment that my conceptions are greater than my nature, and when I consider that my life is ridiculous in my own eyes, I am lost in impenetrable darkness. Happier, no doubt, is the man who hews wood, burns charcoal, and blesses himself with holy water whenever the thunder growls. He lives like the brute, nay, but he sings at his work. His peace I shall not know, and yet like him I shall pass away. With time his life slips by, the agitations, the anxieties, the spectres of an unknown grandeur delude and hurry forward my own. Letter 19, Fontainebleau, August 18, 2. There are moments, notwithstanding, when I find myself imbued with hope and the sense of freedom. Time and the things of time confront me majestic in their harmony, and a feeling of happiness comes over me, as if happiness might indeed be mine. I surprise myself in the act of reverting to my former years. Again I discern in the rose the delight of its beauties and all its heavenly eloquence. What, I happy? It is impossible, but I am, notwithstanding, and happy even to plenitude, as he who, starting from some dreadful dream, is restored to a life of peace and freedom, as he who issues from the vile durance of a dungeon, and after 10 years looks once again upon the peace of the sky, happy even as the man who loves her whom he has snatched from destruction. But the supreme moment passes. A cloud before the sun obscures its fruitful light. The birds are silenced. The growing shadow sweeps away my dream and my joy before it. Then I start walking. I go forward. My pace hastens, but again I return sadly. And presently I re-enter the woods, lest the sun should again shine forth. And yet in all this there is something which soothes and consoles. What is it? I can hardly say, but time does not cease its progress when my suffering lulls me to sleep, and I love to watch the ripening of the fruit which will fall in the autumn wind. Letter 20, Fontainebleau, August 27, II. How little is essential for the man who is anxious merely to live, and how much for him who would live in contentment and make use of his days. Happy would he be who had the strength to renounce felicity, confessing that it is too impracticable. But is it necessary to remain always alone? Peace itself is a melancholy boon if one has no hope of sharing it. There are many, I admit, who can find sufficient permanence in some advantage of the moment, and others can restrict themselves to a mode of life which is devoid of order and taste. I have seen such a person trimming his beard before a broken glass. The children's linen was hung out of the window, and one of their dresses over the frying-pan handle. Their mother was washing them close by a bare table, where hashed meat and the bones of the Sunday turkey were served on cracked plates. There might have been soup, but the cat had upset the broth. People call this a simple life. For myself, I term it an unfortunate one, if occasional, miserable if compulsory and permanent, while if voluntary and not under protest, if one is content to live on in this style, then I term it a ridiculous existence. The contempt of riches has a very fine sound in books, but with an establishment and no money, a man must either be void of feeling or endowed with invincible strength. Now, given a great character, I question whether one would stoop to such a life. To all that is fortuitous we defer, but to bow the will perpetually under such a yoke of misery is to accept the misery. Are not Stoics of this order deficient in that sense of the fitness of things which should tell us that a life like this is not in consonance with our nature? Their simplicity, stripped of all order, elegance, and decency, rather recalls to my mind the unclean self-denials of a mendicant monk or the savage penances of a fakir than philosophical fortitude and indifference. There is a neatness, a care, a congruity, a harmony in simplicity itself. The persons to whom I allude do not possess a tenpenny glass, but they frequent the theatre. They have broken china and fine clothes. Their ruffles are elaborately plaited, but their skirts are of coarse linen. If they go for a walk, it is invariably to the Champs-Élysées. It pleases these hermits, say people, to observe the passers-by, and to do so they become objects of their contempt, sitting on a few blades of grass amidst the dust raised by the crowd. In their impassive philosophy they disdain arbitrary conventions. They eat their buns on the ground, between the dogs and the children, and the coming and going of innumerable feet. There they study mankind, gossiping with nurses and maidservants. There they meditate a broadside, forewarning kings of the perils of ambition, reproving the luxury of society, instructing all men how to moderate their appetites, to live in accordance with nature, and to eat the cakes of Nanterre. I will not dwell on the subject further. If I led you too far into the temptation of jesting on certain themes, you might ridicule in return the strange fashion in which I am living just now in my forest, and it may well be somewhat childish to make a desert for oneself so close to a capital. You must admit all the same that it is a far cry from my woods in the vicinity of Paris to a tub in Athens, and I will grant in return that the Greeks civilized like ourselves, had a larger license for eccentric behaviour, as they were nearer to ancient times. The tub was chosen for the purpose of leading publicly, and in the maturity of age, the life of a sage therein. That is extraordinary enough, but the extraordinary did not particularly offend the Greeks. Usage and accepted conventions by no means constituted their supreme code. With them everything might possess its individual character, and that which was ordinary and universal was that which was rare among them. As a people who were initiating or pursuing the experiment of social life, they courted experience of institutions and customs without deciding which habits were exclusively good. But we who have no room left for doubt on this matter, we who have chosen in all things the best that is possible of all, do well to consecrate even the lesser manners, and to visit with our contempt any man who is sufficiently stupid to forsake such a well-known, beaten track. For the rest, and in all seriousness, my excuse, as one who has no ambition to copy the cynics, is the fact that I do not take credit for the caprices of a young man, nor do I, in the midst of others, by any direct method oppose my ways to theirs in things which are not enjoined me by duty. I indulge myself in a single eccentricity, which of itself is indifferent, but one which, in certain respects, I consider to be for my own good. It might offend some ways of thinking, but this, as it seems to me, is the sole inconvenience which can be suffered, and I conceal it from others in order that the inconvenience may be avoided. End of section 15.